Well, there is never a dull moment in Canadian politics in 2026. And on Wednesday morning, another Conservative MP crossed the floor to join the Liberals. Marilyn Gladu, a longtime MP from Sarnia, is now the fifth opposition MP and fourth Conservative to join the Liberal Party. As always, thrilled to be joined by Paul McCucci. Paul, on a bombshell that has rocked Ottawa to the core.
Yeah, definitely. You know, we did a show about Matt Generu.
Yes.
This was a few weeks ago now when he crossed over. And it was a really weird show. I think why we brought it up, quite frankly, because it was the one where he had actually moved from Alberta to BC. His wife had got a job. He went with his family, his two girls, moved everyone across, and then crossed the floor after saying he was retiring.
Yes.
And the issue was in the show that we were so kind of focused on is that he had actually said he was resigning and that Pierre Poilievre just let him sit. He didn't move to get a by-election. He didn't move forward. And he sat so long, and then finally he crossed. And we were like, why didn't we nip it in the butt when it happened? So that was the thing that came to light first. So, you know, we focused on it. Then, you know, like the rest of Canada, we all said, you know, by-elections are going to happen. And I don't know about you, Jim. We've been watching it. We've been talking about doing shows on the by-election, but the by-elections have been so quiet, like eerily quiet, because, you know, we've been focused on the Iran war.
Yes.
We've been focused on all the things in our lives and all the things on TV that are mainstream. And they're pretty, you know, they're super important. And so we got focused on that. The by-elections have been quiet. We haven't seen the leaders. You know, we've been watching them in Texas, you know, podcasting.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of superstar celebrity stuff that our leaders do now that we're kind of fixated on. I just spent I spent 2 hours, I mentioned to you coming into the show, watching another podcast.
Oh, the Diary of a CO.
With Pierre Poilievre.
Yeah.
A very interesting podcast, right?
Yeah.
And the funny thing about this is, I just said to you before you announced it, you just came walking in the room. I said, you know, I watched the Pierre Poilievre podcast. And to tell you the truth, I learned a bunch of things that actually made me more interested now in following him, because quite now I'm trying to understand the man.
And hear what he has to say.
Well, and I'm getting a feel for his background. I now understand why he is like he is.
Yes.
Because he's telling us about his background, his childhood, the challenges he had, the upbringing, you know, his parents divorcing, all that stuff, you know, so I'm thinking, oh, that's interesting. You know, it's an interesting podcast. The questions were good. You know, the answers were interesting, you know, very textbook. I'm watching a person who's very bright talk to another person who's very bright. And quite frankly, it's interesting me. So I leave that. And then today he loses another pivotal member in a conservative riding,
which has been conservative for years.
Well, you know, I spent some time, I built a project down in Sarnia, I mentioned to you.
Yeah.
And really conservative, quite frankly, in the days when Mike Harris was in, there was always a issue of whether Point Edward would be rolled up. Remember, there was a challenge of whether Point Edward would be rolled up into the boundaries of Sarnia. And the conservatives on a provincial side wanted to keep it separate because there were two seats there.
Yeah.
And so they fought to keep Point Edward and Sarnia sort of from not being amalgamated. And that was always the issue with rebounding. But, and they were both conservative seats. They were both very interested. You know, the conservatives always spent a lot of time, Chemical Valley. They always gave a lot of projects. They made sure Sarnia was always happy, key border crossing, all that good stuff. And now, she, who has mostly conservative views, right?
Very conservative views.
Yeah. She just voted against legislation for LGBTQ, you know, basically, which is a liberal initiative.
Big time.
Yeah. And voted that, you know, about sex changes and things like that. It was very controversial. And now she's crossing.
Now, the evening before this happened, the Tuesday evening, there was an all candidates meeting in Scarborough Southwest. And Dolly Begum, the provincial NDP candidate, now running federally Liberal, was basically face-to-face with a lot of upset NDP supporters who voted for her provincially, who feel offended and betrayed because of what's happening in Palestine, that she's joining Carney and the Liberals. And I've not seen constituents that worked up, that angry at someone before. And there is a sense of anger amongst a lot of everyday Canadians feeling helpless. I voted for someone. I voted for you because you believed in this. A few months ago, you were saying this, and now you're doing a complete 180 to join Carney and the Liberals. For Dolly Begum voting on it, and now Marilyn Gladu just walking across the floor, and now she's a member of the Liberals. And I think a lot of Canadians are wondering, is this fair that you get a majority by people crossing the floor? It's a debate going on across Canada.
Oh yeah. Well, Dolly's an interesting one, quite frankly, because the gentleman who I think you're referring to that you showed me, he was actually verbatim repeating her statements
in Queen's Park.
Like verbatim, and in saying now you're flipping and you're going to a party who is totally against your beliefs. Why?
And he never got an answer.
No, she just walked out. They removed her and basically removed him. They were parted, and he was quite animated. The crowd was quite animated. It was supposed to be, I think, a debate.
But it was an all candidates debate, and then she walked up. This guy was obviously quite passionate and had a lot of hard feelings and wanted an answer from Dolly. Why? Just why?
Well, the interesting thing, these by-elections, as the leaders of the parties are actually flying around the world, I think they had both conceded that this was what I found interesting until you were telling me about Dolly today. I think the leaders had kind of conceded they knew the way it was going to go.
The Liberals will do a 3-0 sweep, and they'll have the majority, and
it was done. And I think they had kind of wrapped it up. Pierre was traveling. He's like, okay, I can't win these. Okay. I'm not going to bother.
I'll plan my next steps.
Exactly. Which is very odd, to tell you the truth. It's very odd that a leader doesn't come into the by-election ridings and campaign with the people they're running. It's a little demoralizing. I actually found it odd because if I was in their shoes and I was putting the time and the money and the effort and my personal reputation at play, I would be a little disappointed that the leadership didn't come in and help me a little more.
I have seen Carney and Terrebonne because it's such a coin flip riding in Quebec.
Right.
Between the Bloc Québécois and the Liberal. It'll come down again to a handful of votes. But as far as the other ridings in Rosedale and Scarborough Southwest, I'm like, it just seems like it's just candidates posting stuff on their social media. And then this explosive all candidates meeting that happened on Tuesday.
So maybe, to your point, maybe they got cold feet. They said maybe it's not going to go as well as we thought, and so they started, getting on their horse and having conversations in Sarnia. That seems to be what went down.
Well, and then so now they're one seat short of majority. Rosedale is a slam dunk. It's always been Liberal. That gives them a majority, and now there are whispers and some that there may be other floor crossers, which would give him even more of a majority. So then Carney has his mandate. He has a majority. For God's sake, Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, the so-called conservative Premier, was campaigning.
I saw that.
Openly campaigning for Carney to have a majority.
Yeah. And that hasn't gotten better, and one of the big issues in the Conservative Party, federally and provincially, is that relationship has not mended.
And I think it's worse.
It's worse. And quite frankly, I don't know why. I don't know why that wasn't a key initiative coming out of it to kind of get together, break bread, figure out what was going on, and at least agree not to impede each other.
Work together for each other's benefit.
Well, even if you didn't even if your personalities didn't jive at all, which I can see how they wouldn't.
Yeah.
It'd be, at least I'd ask for you to abstain from any activity. But Pierre wasn't even able to get that.
No.
He wasn't able to even reach a resolution to get him to stand on the sidelines. So now he is out actively again. This is the second time, it's going on in Ontario, and so quite frankly, what do we do now? Because now we're going to basically de facto have a majority government, which I think on previous shows we did talk about. We kind of agreed that, that's going to happen anyway, but it is kind of an odd, this one is, I think, given the values of the candidate, it's a really hard one for even Liberal Party members to swallow now.
So you had Dolly, who's far, far left, now running to be Liberal, and Marilyn, who's hard right, joining the Liberals. And so Carney's taken them from all sides. And, there are members of the Liberal Party and members of the Liberal media are like, wait a second. What's going on here? And some people are quite upset, not just because she crossed, but some of them are not welcoming her with open arms as Carney is on the social media. That'll be an interesting caucus meeting when some people for years who have butted heads with Marilyn in legislation and voting and just philosophy of how to run the country. Now they're supposed to be all best friends for the next few years.
It seems to be, it's interesting because, the way they're describing, and this is a official opposition description. So the way we're starting to describe some of these to and froing in politics is, my job is to be the official opposition, right?
And hold them to account.
I find that very interesting. And, it is a very technical definition of what the opposition does. But, there has to be a little emotion in it. There has to be a little feeling in it. Like, that's the passion part of it. And what I think we're starting to see is it's a little more of a business than it is a calling.
Okay.
Right. Because now we're starting, and, Pierre, when he did the podcasting, and he's describing sort of his role in government, he's describing it almost like a job description. And so quite frankly, what's kind of becoming apparent is as they walk across, this is a little bit of a job description. My role is to play this role. So I'm going to come out. These are my, and then when it's time to switch that off and switch my role, I walk over and my value system doesn't really matter anymore. I switch to a new value system because I'm in a new role. That's really, now we're getting into a really odd definition of what their job or what their role is. Because you are supposed to, if you join the Conservative Party, you're supposed to
stand for something.
Well, the values of the Conservative Party. If you're a liberal, you're supposed to stand for the values of a liberal party. That's kind of what you're not fighting for, but you're passionate about to help the country move forward. And that's the to and fro of the debate that should make for the best country, right? That's,
I agree.
I believe in this, you believe in this. At some point, we have to concede to get the best outcome for the country. So that's what it's supposed to be. It's not supposed to be a job description. It's not supposed to be, we just got a raise, and if I move over there, I go from $232,000 a year to $262,000. And if we win again, I get an extra 4 years, therefore I get a pension. I get that everyone is, everyone, looks at their best interests. I understand that. But there comes a point where you have to say, am I in this for the betterment of Canada, or am I in this just as a job?
Now, here's my big concern out of all of this is the average Canadian is feeling so disconnected from Ottawa, so dissatisfied. We have a real problem in the last 10 to 15 years in this country with voter turnout, municipal election, provincial, and federally. What is going to take someone who's on the fence about voting, get out there and vote next federal election when your vote may not count because the party and the person you vote for could just walk across the floor for a better deal, like they're working in a company and moving from one firm to another.
Well, and it's interesting. We have a new podcaster aboard. He's a great guy, and we just did a podcast. And before we asked him, do you follow politics? When we met him and we were kind of interviewing for the show. And the funny part is, he said, no, absolutely not. He says, I come from a country, quite frankly, where politics is so corrupt and misguided that I left my interest in politics, left me a long time ago. Mm-hmm. I came to Canada and I saw no reason to pick it up again. So I've abandoned it, which is, it's interesting because it should be mandatory for every Canadian to vote.
In Australia, I believe it is.
It is.
They have rules that you have to vote.
Yeah. So, and most countries, quite frankly, they give people a day off, they go vote. And, if we were ever going to give mandatory holidays to any Canadian, it should be to vote.
Yeah.
Right. So we don't do that, but it should be mandatory that we all vote. And regardless of, how much you follow it, you do take the time to figure out which X to put in the box, which check to check. And quite frankly, we're not doing that. And therefore, by doing it this way, you're going to turn so many people off that they're not interested in it.
And that's my concern is Carney is looking at, this is a majority. I don't have to worry about elections for the next few years. I can do what I want with my caucus and with my cabinet ministers, but I don't know if they're really thinking about the damage it's doing to the Canadian psyche about elections and voting and politics. It's already a fragile thing right now. People are like quite fed up with politicians and conflict of interest and them getting rich and living a life that is more and more so distant from the average Canadian. They can't even dream about living that life. And now politicians who you voted for, maybe you volunteered for. Maybe you put a sign in your yard for because you believed in them, what they stood for. Just walk across the floor to join Carney and the Liberals.
You know, it's it's interesting you say that, because I've been at a few political events over the last month, and I was with a friend of mine. We met each other, and we've known each other for 20 years. And he came to the same event I was at just by happen chance. We were leaving, and he said to me, "You know, this reminds me of the 90s."
Huh.
I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "Remember we used to go to the events," and he said, "There'd be no one but the politicians there."
Right.
And I said, "Yeah, this one does remind me of the one we were leaving, quite frankly. There was no one there.
There was no just average person.
No, there's no one there. There's only political staff
Yeah.
and them." And he said, "Yeah, you remember the 90s after things were bad in the early 90s.
Yeah.
We used to go to these things. And quite frankly, we used to walk in and you knew all the staff members. And quite
Hey,
frankly,
Paul.
they were the only ones there. And then you used to say hello to everyone. They used to give this speech to their staff members. They used to videotape it so it looked like people were there."
Yeah.
It's starting to look like that again. And it is because you're disconnecting from the public. The public doesn't want to take the time because they're thinking that the outcome is already predetermined. You know, it's like a game where you know the odds.
And so you as a Canadian feel like you have no say. Like the democratic process, the democracy that we were promised as Canadians, that I believe in something, I vote for a candidate, they enter the House of Commons and they fight for me and my constituents, seems to be going away.
Right. But it does seem to be going away. The interesting thing is, you know, I don't know how this is going to go, but she's walked across. So now she's going to finish up in Ottawa, head home. And, you know, I guess she's going to meet her past constituents and have to
now the office goes blue to red. Now
red.
Yeah.
I don't know how that's going to go. I honestly start to wonder, like, how are these all going to go with people? And, you know, hopefully, you know, and I always say this, you know, hopefully we come out of this well.
I hope.
Yeah, I hope. You know, this crazy economic malaise that we're in right now, hopefully it all kind of straightens out. We kind of right size, and all this is kind of just you know, we do a podcast and we talk about it later and say, thank goodness everything right sized and we made the right decisions. What happens in these cases is if things don't go well, people then start to get very upset that their decisions were second guessed. People made decisions on their behalf. And that's when it's not so good. And quite frankly, I think part of this is not contingency planning for that to happen. And, you know, so, you know, I hope for the best interest of Canada, it doesn't go that way. But
I'm going to ask you something. So say you're Paul McCucci and you're one of the power brokers in the Canadian Conservative Party, and you have 6 or 7 women, really successful, bright, wealthy people who are the money and the power behind the party. Is it time to have a secret conversation with each remaining member of the Conservative Party in Ottawa and say, do you stand behind Pierre Poilievre?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think now's
yeah.
the time. You know, and the funny thing is, coming into the show, you and I, like I said, we were having this conversation about how we're starting to understand him more. But sometimes in business and life, you're just too late.
The damage is done, right?
Yeah. So, you know, and that's the it's kind of the Colin Powell, you know, rule of war. You know, you have to make the decision when you have 85% of the information. If you start making decisions when you have 100%, the opportunity has passed you by.
Interesting.
So
Yeah.
him kind of starting to disclose his personal background and us getting to know him and everything happening now, it's great. It's probably too late because your opposition has picked up too much steam. You've done a lot of damage with your existing membership, and therefore to right size that, they're probably not looking at it the same, right? They're like, not feeling it with this party, not feeling the leadership, not feeling I'm part of anything, not feeling I have a direction or course or goal or business plan that I can get behind. Okay, I'm going to start to make personal decisions. And therefore, yeah, you probably, at this point, you probably start looking and saying, hey, you know, I know we had the leadership.
But he's not the guy.
Not the guy, because at the end of the day, you know, you are losing the majority. You are having people every month or two walking across. So if you keep at this pace, think about it, Jim. If you keep at this pace for the next year, or what, 6 or 7 more people?
I mean, according to some of the insiders in Ottawa, that's not an impossible scenario. There could be 2 more, there could be 6 more. And if we get to that point, I don't think it's an untenable situation for the Conservatives and Pierre Poilievre. No matter if he's softened his tone, if he's changed his attitude and his style in the House of Commons, if he's become more open and joined these podcasts, he may still stay in politics and still be a member of Parliament and a cabinet minister.
Sure.
Like Joe Clark. I mean, Joe Clark was the prime minister, got beat by Trudeau after a confidence vote, and stayed on the Conservatives for years as a very respected member of Parliament. And maybe that's his future, but they may need another leader if they're actually ever going to win an election.
Well, it's interesting you bring up Joe Clark because, listening to Pierre Poilievre on this last podcast, the thing I thought, great podcast, got a lot of insight. But he is a professional politician. So the way he presents himself is, I basically, had this happen to me. And then I found politics. And
from his early 20s.
Exactly. And then I fell in love with it. And so that's all I've ever done.
Yeah.
And he has a photographic memory. He's very bright. He does, he remembers passages of books and theories and everything, which is great.
Yeah.
But it's all very theoretical. It's all very, and so sometimes for people who are practical and have lived life and have life experiences, jobs, more things in their background, it's hard for you to relate to someone who's very theoretical because you're dealing on practical situations. Your background and things you've done have taught you sort of rules that you live by and, the philosophies of life. So then you're meeting someone so now you're not able to find a common ground, a common link. And that I think is a little bit of the challenge right now that he's having. He's not able to kind of link into these people to share that background and the philosophies and where he's going.
Because I'm thinking Jean Chrétien was a pretty successful corporate attorney for 25, 30 years. Paul Martin, Canada Steamship Lines business.
Exactly.
And the business, trucking companies, lawyers, they had something, they built something, got into politics to make a difference, but had that background of actually getting their hands dirty, doing work and going the ups and downs of the economy and having good years and bad years. And they dealt with that for a long time.
Yeah, those were key lessons. And I think he's paying a little bit of the price of not having that background right now.
Yeah.
And you're starting to see it. But, can you turn it around? I thought about it when you told me that. The first thing that came in mind is, can he turn it around?
I don't know.
The first thing I'd be doing. So I'm sitting there now, and I said this on a couple of shows. I'd get my butt back to Ottawa. I'd have my team, and I'd try to figure out, what they're feeling and what they need right now. Because quite frankly, that's something you're missing, because if you run a centralized approach and a centralized government, you isolate people who are sitting on the side of that sometimes, and they start saying, well, I'm not really part of this. So there must be something going on that's making them feel like they're isolated or not part of this philosophy or team.
I know in sports, there's been history where coaches and GMs have taken over whatever sports team and said, look, if you don't want to be here, if you don't want to be part of this, we'll set it up and we'll trade you or give you a release and buy out your contract. But Pierre Poilievre might be at the point where they call everyone together. Look, if people don't want to be here, sit as an independent or cross the floor. We are going to sit with the people that want to be here and part of this. Because right now, it's almost a fait accompli that Mark Carney had in 6 days, he has a majority in the House of Commons. So the Conservatives will have a couple more years sitting in opposition before they have to worry about a next election. Yeah. So if you don't want to be here, go. We'll stay with what we have and try to build on that. Because this death by 1,000 cuts where every few weeks someone else crosses the floor there's so many frustrated people. Like, why do the Liberals keep winning? And why is there always a Liberal government? And can't we get an NDP or a Conservative, another party in there? Until they get their act together, until they have a party and a leader that excites the people, I don't know how they do beat them.
No, I don't think there's any pathway right now. Definitely
in the current situation.
No, listen, he described his role. I am the official opposition. That's where I'm sitting now. Here's my role. And, respectfully, I think, some things he went to the U.S. and he came out and he said, listen, I'm not going to criticize the prime minister on foreign soils.
Classy move.
Very well done.
Yeah.
Some good moves. I think his new handlers, Steve and the crew, I think they've done a really good job at putting him in a better light.
Yeah.
And I think that's all been positive. But again, momentum, you were so far behind at the time that you started with them.
Yeah.
Can you pull that up? And I think probably the answer is no, unfortunately for them.
And so now, the Liberals, they only have to go 1-3 on the 13th on the by-elections. You just need 1 of the 3 without any other floor crossings, and they have their majority. Yeah. And there may be some other people who become independent or cross the floor. It certainly looks like they'll get a few more MPs, and then Carney and his MPs and his caucus and his cabinet ministers can exercise and execute their vision for the country for the next few years before we have to worry about an election.
Now, not all bad, right? So just so and I don't want to leave this on a totally negative note. Because,
I wasn't saying that in a negative way. I'm just saying.
No. And Doug Ford, I think, has a point. In this time and in such a difficult time, maybe having a majority government. And, I wouldn't have said this about 6 months ago, but I'm saying it now. With everything that's gone on with the U.S.,
yes,
the war, and all these crazy things we talk about every day, it may be the right decision for the country. And, that might have played into it on a number of fronts, even the people crossing. So I want to kind of get that in before we finish up.
Absolutely.
Because I think Doug Ford does have a point. We need to make swift, fast decisions. It's something we've struggled with, Jim. And, we do shows on it all the time. Our lack of productivity, our lack of investment, our lack of technology, innovation that gets Canada moving faster, more dynamically, getting our resources into play, stuff we haven't been able to do because of red tape and regulations. It's been the death knell of our growth.
When's the last time a major project was completed in Canada on time?
On budget. And never.
Almost never.
It's been since, it's becoming one of those things that in our lifetime we don't talk about anymore. It's something that we only saw when we were kids.
The Stephen Lecce made the announcement about the nuclear plant renovation. That it stood out because it was actually on time and on budget.
Yeah, when he said that, we're like, wow.
Well, you can do that in Canada?
Yeah. And we actually point to it quite a bit. You notice.
Yeah.
You and I point to it on numerous shows all
because
the time.
It doesn't happen very often.
It's the only example.
And Carney the other day talking about building hospitals and infrastructure and recreation centers and whatever. Okay, great. That's great. Where's the shovels?
Yeah, let's
get the workers. Let's go.
Yeah. Well, that's that, we talk about all the time. Hard hat shovels. Let's get groundbreakings. Let's get that. Like the next set of photos we do and the next tour we do, let's have you with a hard hat on and a shovel. Just keep breaking ground and building.
I want him in the Bobcat where he's digging and with the hydraulics.
No, I don't. I've driven a Bobcat before. And trust me, if any of you have driven a Bobcat, you don't want him trying on.
No, okay, that's a good point.
With people around.
And so after all of this, we assume it's going to be a majority, but
it will.
There will be work to be done by all levels of politics to repair the damage to a lot of people who feel like they're calling them traitors. They feel like they've been double crossed, and for people to heal that wound so they turn out in big numbers for the next election won't be easy, Paul.
No, we're not. We're going to see the damage of it all. Now,
the
only condition I put on that is if it goes well, which for all of us in Canada,
fingers crossed,
we hope it does. If it doesn't, you will see a huge turnout. Right,
because they'll be so upset.
Yeah.
They'll punish them at the ballot box.
Yeah, and you're seeing, listen, what we're seeing in the U.S. right now, right, is probably, you're going to see the results of that, quite frankly, because, that has implications and decisions you make that are hurting the country come back to bite you.
And it seems like, I don't know, we've been doing this floor crossing show every 2 or 3 weeks. I don't think it's going to change.
No more, please.
No more.
We're done. You have majority. Let's cut it out.
He's Paul. I'm Jim. Thanks for watching.
Patriotic means looking out for each other and fixing things together.
True patriotism is being in the country you love, surrounded by people you love, and great weather.
Being a patriot is being a part of your community and caring for it.
It doesn't matter who you are or where you're from, patriotism is the one thing we all share.
It's okay to be critical of government and still be a patriot.
It's gratitude to your country.
Of course I'm a patriot. I'm Canadian. It's my home.
Well, actually, true patriot love is the mission.